You really think sitting up there makes you important? Outside this courtroom, nobody would even give you a second look.
Sit down immediately and allow your attorney to speak before you make this situation any worse.
Victoria laughed and faced the gallery.
Don't lecture me about respect when my family has ended careers of men far more powerful than you.
You have been warned. Another disruption will be entered directly into the official court record.
Go ahead and threaten me. My family will never let me spend 30 years in prison because you got your feelings hurt.
Victoria raised her middle finger and held it toward him. The courtroom went silent. Marcus opened the sentencing file without changing his expression. Victoria smiled, unaware that the calculation before him could take 30 years of her freedom. The morning light filtered through the tall courthouse windows as Judge Marcus Ellison reviewed the motion before him. His black robe draped perfectly over his shoulders, and his reading glasses caught the fluorescent lights overhead. At 58, Marcus had presided over hundreds of cases, but the financial documents spread across his bench told a story that made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor," Gregory Hale said, adjusting his expensive tie as he stood at the defense table, "these property records were obtained without proper warrant specificity. My client's constitutional rights—" "Mr. Hale." Marcus's voice cut through the attorney's argument with quiet authority. The warrant clearly authorized seizure of all documents related to foreclosure proceedings conducted by Ashbourne Properties and its subsidiaries between 2018 and 2023. These banking records fall squarely within that scope. Dana Mercer remained standing at the prosecution table, her arms crossed. She had spent 2 years tracing the financial web that connected 17 stolen homes to Victoria Ashbourne's corporate empire. Every fraudulent transfer, every forged signature, every elderly victim pressured from their property led back to the polished woman seated behind Gregory Hale. "The motion to suppress is denied," Marcus announced firmly. "Ms. Mercer, you may proceed with your presentation." Victoria Ashbourne shifted in her chair. Her designer suit probably cost more than most people earned in months. Her perfectly styled blonde hair framed a face that had never known want, never understood consequences. At 36, she carried herself like someone who believed the world existed for her convenience. Dana stepped forward with a thick folder. "Your Honor, these documents show a systematic pattern of— This is ridiculous." Victoria's voice sliced through the courtroom as she suddenly rose from her seat. The entire gallery went silent. Gloria Bennett, a 72-year-old retired nurse sitting in the third row, gripped her purse tighter. Walter Reed, 68, and dressed in his only good suit, leaned forward in disbelief. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above her keyboard. "Ms. Ashbourne," Marcus said calmly, "you will remain seated unless— Don't lecture me about what I will and won't do." Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. She faced Marcus directly, her eyes blazing with entitlement. "You think that robe makes you powerful? You think any of us don't know exactly why you're sitting up there?" The courtroom atmosphere turned electric. Gregory Hale's face went pale as he grabbed Victoria's arm. "Sit down, now." Victoria shook him off. "People like you get positions like this because institutions are terrified of looking prejudiced. Everyone knows it, everyone sees it, but nobody talks about it." "Objection!" Dana's voice cracked like a whip across the silent courtroom. Marcus felt the familiar burn in his chest that he had learned to control decades ago. The same burn he felt when opposing attorneys questioned his qualifications. The same burn from law school when professors acted surprised by his analytical abilities. The same burn from his childhood when teachers assumed he belonged in remedial classes. But Victoria Ashbourne would not get the reaction she wanted. "Ms. Ashbourne," Marcus said, his voice steady as granite, "you will sit down immediately." Victoria's lips curved into a cold smile. She had spent her entire life believing that wealth granted her the privilege to say whatever she wanted to, whomever she chose. Her family name had opened doors, silenced critics, and purchased immunity from accountability. Instead of sitting, Victoria raised her right hand. Her middle finger extended directly toward Marcus. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Gloria Bennett covered her mouth in shock. Walter Reed's eyes widened. The court reporter stared in disbelief. Even the bailiff stepped forward instinctively. Gregory Hale grabbed Victoria's wrist. "What are you doing? You're destroying your own case." Marcus did not shout. He did not slam his gavel. He did not lean forward or show any emotion whatsoever. "Let the record reflect," Marcus said in the same measured tone he used for routine procedural matters, "that the defendant has directed an obscene gesture toward the bench at 11:47 a.m. Contempt of court will be addressed separately from the underlying proceedings." Victoria lowered her hand slowly, still smiling. She whispered to Hale, but her voice carried just enough for Marcus to hear. "He'll never dare give an Ashbourne serious time. My family has too much influence in this city." "Return to your seat, Ms. Ashbourne," Marcus commanded. Victoria sat down gracefully, crossing her legs as if she had just delivered a masterful performance. Her smile never wavered as she stared across the courtroom at Marcus, confident that her display of disrespect had somehow demonstrated her power rather than her desperation. "Bailiff," Marcus said quietly, "please summon the jury." Dana Mercer stepped back to the prosecution table, her hands steady, despite the tension crackling through the courtroom. Victoria's obscene gesture still hung in the air like smoke, but Marcus had diffused the moment with surgical precision. Now came the real work. "Your Honor," Dana began, lifting a thick manila folder, "these banking records trace 17 residential properties through a network of shell companies ultimately controlled by the defendant." She approached the evidence table where documents lay arranged in neat rows. Each page told the same ugly story: vulnerable homeowners, manufactured crises, stolen homes. "The pattern is identical in each case," Dana continued. "Ashbourne Properties would purchase distressed mortgages through subsidiary corporations. Within 60 days, elderly homeowners received notices claiming they owed fabricated processing fees, inspection charges, and administrative costs that never existed in their original loan agreements." Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. Her earlier outburst had failed to rattle him. That failure seemed to intrigue her more than anger her. Gregory Hale rose immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. These records were obtained through an overly broad subpoena that—" "Overruled," Marcus said firmly. "The subpoena was properly limited to accounts connected to the identified properties. Ms. Mercer may continue." Dana nodded gratefully. When homeowners couldn't pay these invented fees, Ashbourne subsidiaries would declare them delinquent and initiate foreclosure proceedings. The homes were then transferred between shell companies before being sold at significant profits. She held up a photograph of a modest two-story house with a small front porch. This was Gloria Bennett's home on Maple Street. She lived there for 41 years after buying it with her late husband's veteran benefits. In 2019, she received a notice claiming she owed $3,800 in property maintenance assessments that appeared nowhere in her mortgage documents. Gloria Bennett sat straighter in the gallery, her weathered hands folded tightly in her lap. The woman who had spent decades caring for sick patients now watched someone finally care about the injustice done to her. "When Mrs. Bennett couldn't pay fees she didn't actually owe," Dana continued, "Ashbourne Properties foreclosed and sold her home for $160,000. She received nothing." "Objection!" Hale stood again. "This is inflammatory storytelling, not evidence presentation." "Sustained in part," Marcus ruled. Ms. Mercer, please focus on the documentary evidence rather than narrative descriptions. Dana accepted the correction smoothly. The banking transfers show the same pattern across all 17 properties. Fabricated fees, forced foreclosures, shell company transfers, profitable resales. She moved to another exhibit. This document is particularly significant, Your Honor. It's an original property deed that Mr. Walter Reed has preserved since 1987. Walter Reed nodded from his seat in the gallery. His careful preservation of documents had become more important than he ever imagined. Mr. Reed's original notarized deed bears his authentic signature, Dana explained. However, this refinancing agreement from 2019, supposedly signed by Mr. Reed, contains what appears to be an identical signature, including a small ink smudge that appears in the exact same location on both documents. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied Dana's presentation. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she looked genuinely concerned about the evidence rather than simply annoyed by the proceedings. Hale jumped up again. Your Honor, without expert forensic analysis, these signature comparisons are pure speculation. The documents speak for themselves at this stage, Marcus replied. The jury will determine what weight to give the comparison. Objection overruled. Victoria leaned toward Hale and whispered something urgent. Hale shook his head firmly, but Victoria's expression hardened with familiar determination. She was accustomed to getting her way through money, influence, or intimidation. Courtroom procedure frustrated her because it operated by rules she couldn't simply purchase around. That's impossible, Victoria said loudly, interrupting Dana mid-sentence. The courtroom turned toward her. Marcus set down his pen deliberately. Ms. Ashbourne, you will not interrupt the proceedings again without proper procedural motion through your attorney. Victoria's smile returned, but it carried a sharper edge than before. Your Honor, this entire presentation is Ms. Ashbourne. Marcus's voice cut through her words like a blade. Further interruptions will result in immediate contempt sanctions separate from your underlying case. Do you understand? For several seconds, Victoria stared at Marcus as if trying to decide whether he was bluffing. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, she nodded once and turned away, but her expression promised that this battle was far from over. Dana resumed her presentation, moving through banking records that showed millions of dollars flowing through Ashbourne-controlled accounts. Each exhibit built on the previous one, creating an undeniable pattern of systematic fraud. After 40 minutes of detailed financial evidence, Hale rose for what everyone knew would be the crucial question. Your Honor, he said carefully, given the seriousness of these allegations, could the court provide guidance on the possible sentencing exposure my client faces if convicted on all counts? Marcus nodded. This was exactly the kind of question that belonged on the record, considering the number of victims, the documented financial losses, and the enhancement provisions for crimes targeting elderly victims. A conviction on all counts with the applicable sentencing guidelines could support a sentence reaching 30 years imprisonment. Victoria laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed through the silent courtroom. Every head turned toward her. The sound had been pure disbelief, as if the very idea of serious consequences was absurd to someone of her wealth and position. Marcus looked directly at Victoria, his dark eyes steady and unmistakable. 30 years, Ms. Ashbourne. Her laughter died instantly. The confident smile that had carried her through months of legal proceedings vanished like mist in sunlight. Her face went pale beneath her expensive makeup. 30 years, 3 decades, most of the rest of her life. The gallery erupted in whispers. Reporters who had been taking occasional notes suddenly began writing frantically. Several stood and moved toward the courtroom doors, recognizing a major story when they heard it. Victoria's hand shot out and gripped Hale's sleeve with desperate strength. She pulled him down until his ear was inches from her mouth. He will regret humiliating me, she whispered, her voice shaking with rage and fear. Before I spend one night in prison, that judge will learn exactly what happens to people who try to destroy an Ashbourne. Court adjourned at 4:30 that afternoon, and Victoria Ashbourne swept through the courthouse doors like a woman heading to victory, rather than facing 3 decades in prison. The marble corridor outside Marcus's courtroom buzzed with reporters who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The first opportunity to hear directly from the wealthy defendant who had just learned she could spend most of her remaining life behind bars. Gregory Hale followed close behind, his expression tense with the kind of professional concern that came from watching clients make decisions that could destroy them completely. "Ms. Ashbourne," he said quietly, catching her elbow as camera crews rushed forward, "I strongly advise you to make no public statements. Anything you say now could—" "Could what?" Victoria turned on him, her eyes blazing with fury that had been building since Marcus spoke those 2 devastating words. "Could make things worse? He just threatened to cage me like an animal for 30 years. How exactly does it get worse?" The reporters pressed closer, sensing the kind of explosive confrontation that would dominate evening news broadcasts. Microphones thrust forward, camera lights flicked on, casting harsh shadows across Victoria's face. "Ms. Ashbourne, how do you respond to the judge's statement about your potential sentence?" The question came from a young reporter with Channel 7 News. Victoria's smile returned, cold, calculated, and absolutely venomous. "What you witnessed today wasn't justice. It was revenge." Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of believing every word she spoke became truth simply because she was the one speaking it. Judge Ellison decided to punish me the moment I stood up to him in that courtroom. He threatened 30 years because I embarrassed him personally, not because the evidence supports it. Hale stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Ms. Ashbourne, please." But Victoria was just getting started. The cameras were rolling, and she had found her narrative. Everyone saw what happened. I questioned his authority, and he immediately retaliated by threatening me with the maximum possible sentence. That's not how our justice system is supposed to work. Judges are supposed to be impartial, not vindictive. "Are you saying Judge Ellison is biased against you?" Another reporter called out. "I'm saying that what happened in there had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with a man who couldn't handle being challenged." Victoria's voice rose slightly, carrying just enough emotion to sound genuinely outraged rather than simply angry. "No defendant should face 30 years because they stood up to judicial intimidation." Inside his chambers, Marcus reviewed the afternoon's transcript with Court Administrator Evelyn Brooks, a meticulous woman in her early 60s who had worked courthouse administration for over 2 decades. She understood better than most how quickly procedural disputes could spiral into institutional crises. "The record is clear," Marcus said, running his finger down the typed pages. The sentencing calculation was completed before she interrupted the proceedings. "My statement about 30 years followed directly from the applicable guidelines, not from any personal conflict." Evelyn nodded, but her expression carried concern that went beyond simple procedural accuracy. "Judge, you need to see this." She turned her computer monitor toward him. The complaints started arriving within an hour of adjournment. Marcus scanned the formal allegations appearing in his email inbox: judicial misconduct, vindictive sentencing, racial bias. Each complaint contained nearly identical language, suggesting coordination rather than spontaneous outrage. "They're claiming you targeted Ms. Ashbourne because of her race and social position," Evelyn explained. 3 different organizations have already announced they're reviewing the case for potential civil rights violations. Through the window overlooking the courthouse steps, Marcus could see Victoria still surrounded by reporters and cameras. Even from 5 stories up, her gestures looked animated and confident. the body language of someone launching an attack rather than defending against one. Dana Mercer knocked and entered without waiting for permission, her face flushed with anger. "Judge, we need to release the complete courtroom recording immediately. Victoria's people are already editing clips to make it look like you threatened her right after she insulted you. They're removing your entire sentencing explanation. We will follow proper judicial procedure," Marcus replied firmly. "Every response must go through appropriate channels. We don't fight public relations battles with evidence that belongs in courtroom proceedings. But they're destroying your reputation while we follow procedure," Dana protested. "By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the state will be running clips that make you look vindictive and unprofessional." Marcus turned back to his computer, where more complaints continued arriving every few minutes. "Then they'll be running incomplete information. The complete record will speak for itself when the proper time comes." Evelyn cleared her throat diplomatically. "Judge, there's something else. The Ashbourne Family Foundation has announced that their legal advocacy organization is filing an emergency recusal motion tomorrow morning. They're demanding your immediate removal from the case." Outside, Victoria's press conference was building momentum. Additional news crews had arrived, and several legal commentators were already offering analysis to live television audiences. The courthouse steps had become a stage, and Victoria Ashbourne was delivering the performance of her life. "This isn't about my guilt or innocence anymore," she told the cameras, her voice carrying across the marble plaza. "This is about whether judges can use their power to punish defendants who refuse to show them personal deference. If Judge Ellison can threaten me with 30 years for standing up to him, he can do it to anyone." That evening, back in his downtown office, Gregory Hale poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and tried to process how completely his client had ignored every piece of advice he'd given her over the past 6 months. His phone rang. Victoria's voice crackled through the speaker with the kind of energy that came from someone who believed they had just seized control of a desperate situation. "Gregory, did you see the coverage? Every major outlet is questioning Ellison's conduct. We've turned this around completely." Hale set down his glass carefully. "Victoria, what you did today could destroy any chance of a successful appeal. Attacking a sitting judge publicly is exactly what needed to happen," she interrupted. "You're thinking like a lawyer, Gregory. I'm thinking like someone who understands how power actually works. Convictions can be overturned, sentences can be reduced, but reputations? Once those are destroyed, they never fully recover. You're playing with fire." Victoria's laugh carried no warmth whatsoever. "Ellison thinks his robe protects him. He's about to learn that destroying someone's credibility is much easier than getting a criminal conviction overturned. By the time I'm finished with him, no one will remember anything about my case except that he tried to abuse his position to settle a personal score." The line went dead, leaving Hale staring at his phone and wondering if he was representing a client or enabling someone who had just declared war on the entire judicial system. Before leaving chambers that night, Marcus turned to Evelyn with the kind of careful instruction that came from understanding exactly how serious the situation had become. "Preserve every recording, every assignment log, and every archived record connected to this case," he said quietly. "Everything. If they want to question how this proceeding was conducted, they'll have access to every single detail that led to today's result." The morning chaos outside Superior Court made the previous day's media attention look restrained. Protesters carried signs reading, "Judicial accountability now," and "Ellison must go," while counter-protesters held banners declaring, "Respect our courts," and "Justice is not revenge." Television crews had claimed every available spot along the courthouse steps, turning the Marble Plaza into a battleground of competing narratives. Victoria Ashbourne stepped from her black sedan wearing a navy suit that projected both wealth and wounded dignity. She moved through the crowd with practiced confidence, pausing to shake hands with supporters, while cameras captured every moment. The woman who had raised her middle finger at a sitting judge now presented herself as a victim of judicial overreach. Gregory Hale followed several steps behind, his expression carefully neutral as reporters shouted questions about the emergency hearing. He had spent the previous evening reviewing every precedent case involving judicial recusal, searching for legitimate grounds that might survive appellate review. The law was clear. Judges could not be removed simply because defendants disagreed with their rulings. Inside the packed courtroom, reviewing Judge Patricia Hammond called the emergency session to order. The gallery buzzed with journalists, legal observers, and Victoria's supporters, all waiting to see whether Marcus Ellison would be forced to step aside. Hale rose first, his argument measured and professional despite the explosive circumstances surrounding it. Your Honor, the appearance of judicial retaliation has been created when Judge Ellison immediately responded to my client's courtroom conduct by announcing she faced 30 years in prison. The timing suggests that this extreme sentence was delivered as punishment for her expression of frustration rather than as the result of careful legal analysis. Victoria sat perfectly still at the defense table, her hands folded and her expression conveying wounded innocence. She had transformed herself from the arrogant heiress who had insulted Marcus into a sympathetic figure fighting against an apparently vindictive system. Dana Mercer stood to respond, carrying a thick folder and a digital recording device. Her voice remained steady, despite the pressure of defending not only the prosecution's case, but the integrity of the judicial process itself. Your Honor, Mr. Hale's characterization omits crucial context that completely changes the meaning of Judge Ellison's statements. I have here the complete unedited courtroom transcript and the full audio recording of yesterday's proceedings. She activated the recording device, and Marcus's voice filled the courtroom with clinical precision. The gallery listened as he methodically explained the sentencing statutes, calculated the enhancement factors, and detailed how the jury's findings authorized extended punishment. His tone remained entirely professional throughout the 4-minute explanation. Only then did the recording capture Victoria's insulting gesture and Marcus's calm response. Finally, the audio reached the moment everyone had seen in the viral clips, Marcus stating that the combined offenses could result in 30 years of imprisonment. The difference was devastating. In context, the 30-year statement emerged from careful legal analysis rather than emotional retaliation. Marcus had never raised his voice, never expressed anger, and never suggested that Victoria's insult influenced his calculation. Dana looked directly at the reporters in the gallery. The viral clips circulated yesterday removed 58 seconds of Judge Ellison's sentencing analysis. Those missing seconds completely changed the meaning of what followed. This was not retaliation. This was lawful judicial procedure that Ms. Ashbourne's representatives deliberately misrepresented to the public. Murmurs spread through the courtroom as journalists realized they had been manipulated. Several began typing frantically on their phones, updating stories that now looked drastically different from their original coverage. Judge Hammond studied the transcript carefully before ruling. The complete record demonstrates that Judge Ellison's statement followed proper sentencing analysis rather than the defendant's courtroom conduct. The emergency recusal request is denied. Judge Ellison will continue presiding over this matter. Victoria's composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the fury beneath her carefully constructed image. She watched reporters who had supported her narrative now questioning everything they had been told. Outside the courthouse doors, Victoria cornered Dana near the elevator bank, her voice sharp with accusation. "You think you're protecting him, but everyone can see what's really happening here. Ellison targeted me from the beginning, and you're helping him cover it up." Dana stepped closer, her own voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Every time you try to manipulate evidence or manufacture a crisis, you create another official record that works against you. Keep pushing, Victoria. Every lie you tell becomes part of the permanent court file." Hale appeared quickly, placing a firm hand on Victoria's arm. "We're leaving. Now." As the elevator doors began closing, Victoria's fury finally broke through her public composure. She stared at Hale with the kind of cold calculation that had built her family's empire through decades of ruthless business practices. "Attacking his words didn't work," she said quietly. "So we'll attack how he got my case in the first place." That afternoon, Marcus returned to his chambers believing the morning's victory had finally contained Victoria's assault on the court's integrity. The complete recording had exposed her team's manipulation, Judge Hammond had denied the emergency recusal, and several news outlets were now questioning their earlier coverage of the controversy. He was reviewing sentencing precedents when Evelyn Brooks knocked on his door, her usually composed expression tight with concern. She carried a manila envelope bearing the official seal of the State Judicial Oversight Commission. "This arrived by courier 20 minutes ago," Evelyn said, placing the envelope on Marcus's desk with unusual care. "It's marked urgent and requires your immediate response." Marcus opened the envelope and found a formal complaint alleging judicial misconduct. As he read the accusations, his chest tightened with a familiar ache he had not felt in decades. The anonymous complaint claimed that Marcus had deliberately arranged to receive Victoria Ashbourne's case because his late mother had lost her home to a predatory lending company that was later absorbed into the Ashbourne Properties portfolio. The complainant alleged that Marcus viewed this assignment as an opportunity for personal revenge against the family empire that had destroyed his childhood. The painful history was accurate. Marcus's mother, Sarah Ellison, had indeed lost their family home when he was 16 years old after falling behind on payments she could not afford. The foreclosure had devastated their family and shaped Marcus's understanding of how legal systems could protect or destroy vulnerable people. What stunned him was the complaint's next allegation. An electronic access log apparently showed that Marcus's judicial chambers had accessed Victoria's case file 4 days before the random assignment system supposedly selected him as the presiding judge. Marcus stared at the timestamp, his mind racing through the implications. If the log was authentic, it would suggest he had somehow manipulated the assignment process to ensure he received Victoria's case. Even if his handling of the proceedings had been entirely proper, the appearance of deliberate targeting would destroy his credibility and likely force his removal from the case. Within an hour, Dana arrived at Chambers after receiving an urgent call from Evelyn. Her face went pale as she read the complaint. "Marcus, even if this is completely false, the Oversight Commission has to investigate any allegation of assignment manipulation," Dana said, her voice strained. "They could suspend you from the case immediately if they believe there's even a possibility you targeted Victoria deliberately." By late afternoon, Victoria had obtained copies of the complaint through sources Marcus could not identify. She stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by cameras, her composed demeanor radiating righteous indignation. "Judge Ellison has harbored a personal vendetta against my family for decades," she announced to the assembled reporters. "His mother lost her home, and now he's using his judicial power to take revenge on me. This isn't about justice. This is about a man who never got over his childhood pain and decided to make me pay for it." The Judicial Oversight Panel responded swiftly, issuing a temporary order preventing Marcus from imposing final sentence until the assignment allegations could be thoroughly investigated. The very authority Victoria had mocked was now suspended, leaving her case in legal limbo while bureaucrats examined whether Marcus had corrupted the system to target her. That night, alone in his chambers with only the security lighting illuminating his desk, Marcus studied every detail of the access log that threatened to destroy his career. Something nagged at his instincts about the document's authenticity. The timestamp showed his chambers accessing Victoria's case file on September 15th at 2:47 p.m. But as Marcus compared it against his official case assignment records, he noticed something that made his pulse quicken. Victoria's case had been assigned the internal tracking number CV 2024-8847 when it entered the court system. According to the complaint's evidence, Marcus had supposedly accessed that specific case number 4 days before receiving the assignment. But the case number itself had not been generated until September 19th, 4 days after Marcus had allegedly accessed it. Marcus arrived at the courthouse before dawn, his breath visible in the cold morning air. The security guard let him into the darkened building where Evelyn and Dana were already waiting in the Records Administration office. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals. "Show me what you found," Evelyn said without preamble, her voice tight with concern. Marcus spread the complaint documents across her desk and pointed to the damning access log. "Look at this timestamp. September 15th, 2:47 p.m. The log claims I accessed case number CV 2024-8847 that day." Dana leaned closer, studying the exhibit. "That's Victoria's case number. If you accessed it before assignment, the oversight panel will have to remove you immediately." "But that's impossible," Marcus said, his finger tracing the case number. "This specific identifier wasn't generated until September 19th. The system can't access a case number that doesn't exist yet." Evelyn's eyes widened as she understood the implication. "Someone created this log entry after the fact. They knew enough to use your chamber's credentials, but they didn't realize the case numbering sequence would expose them." "We need to prove it," Dana said. "But if we investigate this ourselves, Victoria's lawyers will claim we're tampering with evidence to protect Marcus." Evelyn stood abruptly, moving toward a secured server cabinet in the corner of the room. "After the ransomware attack 2 years ago, I implemented automatic nightly backups that copy all access logs to an isolated archive system. Those backups can't be altered through ordinary courthouse accounts." "Can you retrieve the original September 15th log?" Marcus asked. "Not without oversight panel supervision," Evelyn replied firmly. "If we're going to expose fabricated evidence, we need witnesses who can't be accused of bias." Within 2 hours, Marcus had contacted the Judicial Oversight Commission and requested an emergency hearing. By noon, 3 panel members had arrived to supervise the archive retrieval process. Victoria's defense team was also notified and given the opportunity to observe. Under the watchful eyes of the commissioners, Evelyn accessed the isolated backup system using credentials that required dual authentication. The original access logs from September 15th appeared on the computer screen. Marcus's chambers showed no activity related to Victoria's case file that day. In fact, no entry for case number CV 2024-8847 existed anywhere in the September 15th archive, because the case had not yet been assigned that identifier. The suspicious log entry first appeared on September 22nd, Evelyn announced, checking the archive chronology. 3 days after Judge Ellison announced the 30-year sentencing exposure. One of the oversight commissioners, a stern woman named Judge Patricia Wells, examined the technical evidence carefully. "Ms. Brooks, can you determine what credentials were used to create the false entry?" Evelyn's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up administrative access records. The entry was created using contractor credentials belonging to Data Bridge Systems, an outside technology company that performs courthouse network maintenance. Dana's phone buzzed with a message from her financial investigation team. She read it quickly, then looked up with barely contained excitement. Data Bridge Systems received a $75,000 consulting contract from Meridian Legal Services on September 20th. Meridian Legal Services is wholly owned by Ashbourne Family Holdings. The hearing room fell silent except for the humming of computer equipment. Victoria, who had been summoned to attend the proceedings, sat frozen in her chair as the web of fabricated evidence unraveled before her eyes. Judge Wells addressed the room formally. The oversight panel finds that the access log alleging judicial misconduct was artificially created after the defendant received her sentencing exposure. The evidence suggests deliberate fabrication designed to remove Judge Ellison from this case. Victoria's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure as deputies escorted her from the hearing room. The woman who had spent days claiming Marcus was corrupt now faced questions about whether she had attempted to corrupt the system around him. Outside in the courthouse hallway, Gregory Hale grabbed Victoria's arm and pulled her into an empty conference room. "Did anyone acting for you manufacture that log?" he demanded, his voice sharp with professional alarm. "Because if they did, I need to know right now before this gets worse." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, her calculating expression revealing nothing. "I'm not answering that question," she said finally. Later that same afternoon, Gloria Bennett appeared in the doorway of Dana's courthouse office, clutching a manila envelope against her chest like a shield. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she approached Dana's desk. "Ms. Mercer, something came to my house this morning," Gloria said, her voice tight with worry. "I think you need to see it." Dana gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What is it, Gloria?" Gloria sat down carefully and placed the envelope on Dana's desk. "A courier delivered this at 7 in the morning. Woke me up from sleep. Said it was urgent legal correspondence." Dana opened the envelope and pulled out a thick document bound in expensive paper. Her eyes widened as she read the cover letter. "This is a settlement offer," Dana said, flipping through the pages. "They're offering you $850,000. "That's more than 3 times what my house was worth," Gloria replied, her jaw tightening. "But look at what they want me to do." Dana found the conditions section and read aloud. "In exchange for this payment, Mrs. Bennett agrees to withdraw her victim impact statement from the criminal proceedings against Victoria Ashbourne and to issue a public statement confirming that Ashbourne Properties handled her mortgage matter in accordance with industry standards and treated her fairly throughout the process." "They want to buy my silence," Gloria said firmly. "Victoria already stole my home. She will not buy my voice, too." Dana's prosecutorial instincts immediately recognized the danger. "Gloria, this could be witness interference. Let me trace where this offer came from." She opened her laptop and accessed the court's financial investigation database. Within minutes, she had traced the payment authorization through a complex web of corporate entities. "The payment comes from something called Bennett Resolution Trust," Dana announced. "That trust is managed by Ashbourne Family Office Services. Victoria's family controls the entire structure." "What does that mean?" Gloria asked. "It means Victoria, or someone acting for her, just offered you nearly $1 million to change your testimony and publicly defend her," Dana explained, her voice hardening. "That's exactly the kind of conduct that can turn a legal settlement into criminal obstruction." Gloria stood up abruptly. "I'm not taking their money, Ms. Mercer. That woman destroyed my life. She's not going to silence me now." "We need to get this in front of Judge Ellison immediately," Dana said, reaching for her phone. "This is exactly what Victoria was planning when she said those people should have accepted buyouts when they had the chance." Within an hour, Marcus had cleared his calendar for an emergency hearing. The courtroom felt charged with tension as Victoria entered with Gregory Hale, her confident demeanor noticeably strained since the fabricated log exposure that morning. "Your Honor," Dana began, standing at the prosecutor's table, "the defendant has attempted to interfere with a victim witness by offering substantial payment in exchange for withdrawing testimony and making false public statements." Victoria's head snapped up. "That's a civil settlement offer, Your Honor. Wealthy defendants are allowed to resolve civil claims. There's nothing criminal about offering compensation for damages. Marcus examined the settlement documents carefully. Ms. Ashbourne, this offer specifically requires Mrs. Bennett to withdraw her victim impact statement from these criminal proceedings and to publicly contradict the findings of this court. People settle cases every day, Victoria shot back, her voice rising. Just because she's testifying doesn't mean she can't be compensated for her losses. Settlements become something different when they're designed to influence criminal proceedings, Marcus replied evenly. I'm ordering you to have no direct or indirect contact with any identified victim in this case. That includes offers, payments, communications, or third-party contacts made on your behalf. Victoria's composure finally cracked. She slammed her palm against the defense table with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You're treating me like a common criminal." Hale immediately grabbed Victoria's shoulder and forced her back into her chair, whispering urgently in her ear to remain silent. Marcus's voice remained perfectly controlled. "Ms. Ashbourne, you are facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and theft. The court will not permit you to compound those offenses by attempting to silence your victims." "The order is clear," Marcus continued. "No contact with victims, no payments, no intermediaries. Any violation will result in immediate custody and additional charges." As the hearing concluded, Gloria stood slowly and walked toward the courtroom exit. Dana rose and offered her arm for support. Gloria accepted it gratefully, leaning against the prosecutor as they moved down the aisle. Victoria watched them walk past the defense table, her eyes burning with unmistakable fury, as Gloria Bennett left the courtroom still carrying her voice, still prepared to speak the truth that Victoria's money could not buy. The next morning, Walter Reed returned to the same courthouse carrying a weathered manila envelope that had remained untouched in his bedroom dresser for over 3 decades. His hands shook slightly as he walked through the security checkpoint, not from fear, but from the weight of what he carried. The original notarized deed his father had stored decades earlier. Dana met him outside Marcus's courtroom, her expression focused and determined. "Mr. Reed, are you certain this document has never been copied or altered?" Walter nodded firmly. "My father taught me to keep original papers safe. This deed has been in that envelope since 1987. Nobody else has touched it." Inside the courtroom, Victoria sat rigidly at the defense table, her earlier confidence replaced by visible tension. The failed settlement attempt with Gloria had clearly rattled her, and now she watched Walter approach the witness stand with obvious unease. Dana approached the evidence table where a forensic document examiner had prepared 2 enlarged photographs, one showing Walter's signature from the original 1987 deed, the other displaying the signature from a 2019 refinancing agreement that Ashbourne Properties claimed he had signed. "Mr. Reed," Dana began, "please examine these 2 signatures. Are they both yours?" Walter studied the images carefully. "The first one is mine, yes. I signed that deed when my father transferred the house to me, but I never signed that second paper. I never even saw it until this case started." "Your Honor," Dana announced, "the forensic analysis reveals something extraordinary." She gestured toward the enlarged photographs projected on the courtroom screen. The document examiner, Dr. Sarah Martinez, took the stand. "These signatures appear identical at first glance, but microscopic examination reveals they are impossibly similar. Notice this small ink blot in the letter W on the original 1987 signature." She pointed to a tiny imperfection barely visible to the naked eye. That same ink blot appears in exactly the same position on the 2019 document. The probability of someone naturally reproducing such a microscopic accident is essentially 0. This signature was photographically copied and transferred onto the newer document. A murmur spread through the gallery. Victoria's face had gone pale. Walter turned directly toward Victoria from the witness stand, his voice carrying decades of suppressed anger. "You didn't just take my property, Ms. Ashbourne. Someone working through your company stole my identity to manufacture permission they never received." Gregory Hale stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is making legal conclusions about corporate structure and intent that exceed his knowledge." "Sustained as to legal conclusions," Marcus replied, "but Mr. Reed may testify about his own signature and what agreements he did or did not sign." Hale pressed forward. "Dr. Martinez, isn't it possible that Mr. Reed simply forgot signing this document years later? Memory can be unreliable, especially regarding routine paperwork." Dr. Martinez shook her head. "Mr. Hale, the forensic evidence doesn't depend on memory. The microscopic ink patterns are physically identical. That's scientifically impossible unless one signature was mechanically copied from the other." Dana moved to the evidence table and lifted several additional documents. "Your Honor, we've identified 6 other property agreements connected to Ashbourne Properties that show the same copying pattern. Different homeowners, different years, but identical microscopic imperfections transferred from legitimate signatures onto fraudulent documents." The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Even the court reporter looked up from her keyboard, staring at the projected signatures. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. She shot to her feet, pointing an accusatory finger at Walter. "He's lying for money!" she shouted, her voice echoing off the courtroom walls. "These people will say anything if they think it'll get them a payday." Marcus's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Ms. Ashbourne, sit down immediately and remain silent." But Victoria was beyond listening. "You're all treating me like some street criminal when these people are the ones trying to steal from my family's business." "Deputy," Marcus called sharply, "remove Ms. Ashbourne from the courtroom." As the deputy approached, Hale managed to pull Victoria back into her chair, whispering urgent warnings in her ear. Her outburst had destroyed any remaining sympathy from the gallery. Spectators now stared at her with unmistakable disgust. The scheme had become unmistakably deliberate. This wasn't aggressive debt collection or questionable business practices. Someone had systematically copied signatures from legitimate documents to create fraudulent permission for theft. Marcus called a brief recess. As the gallery slowly filed out, Dana approached the bench. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "Mr. Reed's document may prove intent, even if parts of the financial case later fail." Marcus nodded grimly, understanding the significance. The forged signatures weren't just evidence of fraud. They were proof of calculated criminal conspiracy that could support the severest sentencing enhancements, regardless of what happened to the disputed banking records that had become Victoria's last hope for reducing her exposure. That afternoon, Dana Mercer sat surrounded by boxes of financial records in the prosecutor's conference room. Her team had spent weeks cataloging every document seized from Ashbourne Properties, but the forged signature discovery demanded a fresh examination of the corporate structure. "Look at this," said Detective Ray Sullivan, sliding a folder across the table. "These property deeds show something strange. Houses that should still be tied up in the criminal case got moved around right before trial started." Dana opened the folder and felt her stomach drop. The documents showed a complex web of transfers dated just days before Victoria's trial began. Properties that had been frozen as criminal proceeds were suddenly listed under new ownership by supposedly independent trusts. "The Meridian Family Trust," Dana read aloud, "the Heritage Property Foundation, the Ashbourne Legacy Holdings." She flipped through page after page of transfer documents. "This isn't random. Someone moved everything they could before we could touch it." Her financial analyst, Jennifer Park, pulled up the trust documents on her laptop. "These aren't regular family trusts, Dana. They're structured to survive criminal forfeiture. If Victoria gets convicted and goes to prison, these properties would stay completely outside any restitution proceedings. The devastating reality hit Dana immediately. Victoria hadn't just been fighting to avoid prison. She had been preparing to keep every stolen home even if she lost the criminal case completely. She planned to lose, Dana whispered, staring at the trust paperwork. Victoria expected we might convict her, so she made sure the victims would still lose everything. Detective Sullivan shook his head in disgust. So Gloria Bennett and Walter Reed could win the trial and still never see their homes again? Exactly. Dana reached for her phone. We need an emergency hearing. Tonight. 2 hours later, Marcus's courtroom filled again with spectators, reporters, and attorneys. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the gallery as Dana stood at the prosecution table with a thick stack of trust documents. Your Honor, Dana began, the defendant attempted to place criminal proceeds beyond the reach of lawful restitution by transferring disputed properties into supposedly independent trusts just days before trial. Gregory Hale rose immediately. Your Honor, Ms. Ashbourne has every right to manage family assets through legitimate estate planning. These transfers were executed by qualified attorneys using standard trust instruments. Marcus examined the documents Dana had submitted. The dates were unmistakable. Every transfer occurred within 72 hours of jury selection beginning. Ms. Mercer, Marcus said, what specific relief are you requesting? An immediate freeze on all disputed properties pending final restitution proceedings. The defendant cannot be permitted to shield criminal proceeds simply by moving them between corporate entities she controls. Victoria leaned forward in her chair, whispering urgently to Hale. Her face had turned red with barely contained fury. Marcus studied the trust documentation carefully. The legal structure was sophisticated, but the timing created obvious questions about intent. Mr. Hale, Marcus said, can you explain why these transfers occurred immediately before trial, rather than during normal estate planning? Hale glanced nervously at Victoria before responding. Your Honor, the timing was coincidental. Ms. Ashbourne's family has been updating their estate planning for months. Coincidental? Dana interrupted. Your Honor, Gloria Bennett's former home appears as asset number 12 in the Meridian Family Trust. Walter Reed's property is listed in the Heritage Foundation. These aren't random family assets. They're the exact homes these victims are seeking to recover. A gasp ran through the gallery. Gloria Bennett sat in the front row, staring at Victoria with undisguised shock. Marcus's voice remained controlled but carried unmistakable authority. I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all properties listed in the submitted trust documents pending completion of restitution proceedings. Victoria exploded from her chair. You cannot steal what belongs to my family, she screamed, her voice echoing through the courtroom. Those properties were legally acquired through legitimate business transactions. Ms. Ashbourne, Marcus warned sharply, control yourself immediately. But Victoria was beyond control. Her carefully maintained composure had finally shattered completely. You can lock me up, but you cannot touch what my family built. She pointed an accusatory finger at Marcus. This is exactly the kind of overreach I warned everyone about. Marcus's voice cut through her shouting like ice. Fraud cannot create legitimate ownership, Ms. Ashbourne. Stolen property belongs to whoever the law determines, not whoever can afford the most expensive attorneys. Victoria lunged toward the prosecution table where Dana sat. Those people have no right to... Deputies stepped forward immediately as Hale grabbed Victoria's arm, pulling her back toward the defense table. Sit down now, Hale hissed in her ear, or you'll face additional charges before sentencing. Victoria collapsed into her chair, breathing hard, staring at Marcus with undisguised hatred. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Victoria's mask had finally fallen away completely, revealing the raw desperation underneath her polished exterior. As deputies escorted her from the courtroom, Victoria realized with growing horror that Marcus wasn't just threatening her freedom anymore. He was dismantling the entire financial fortress she had built to protect her family's fortune from the consequences of her crimes. The next morning brought devastating news that hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Judicial Oversight Panel had resumed their investigation into the suspicious case assignment logs. 3 investigators sat in a sterile conference room reviewing printouts and computer screens, while Marcus waited in an adjacent chamber, cut off from the proceedings that would determine his professional future. Panel Chairman Robert Hayes emerged after 2 hours with a grim expression. His words fell like hammer blows in the quiet hallway. "Judge Ellison, while we find the altered assignment log suspicious, we cannot yet definitively attribute the contractor payments to Ms. Ashbourne herself. The financial trail remains under investigation." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The careful language meant everything. "However," Hayes continued, "to preserve public confidence in the judicial process, this panel is temporarily restricting you from issuing final sentence until our inquiry reaches completion." The words echoed in Marcus's mind. Restricted, unable to sentence. The very authority Victoria had mocked was being stripped away while she remained free on bond. 30 minutes later, Victoria emerged from the courthouse steps with a smile that could have powered the entire building. Reporters swarmed around her as she adjusted her designer coat against the morning chill. "Judge Ellison wanted 30 years, she announced to the cameras, her voice carrying across the plaza. "He was so desperate to destroy me that he forgot basic judicial ethics. Now he may lose his robe instead of giving me a sentence." The reporters scribbled frantically. Victoria's confidence had returned in full force. "This investigation proves what I said from the beginning," she continued. "Some judges think their personal feelings matter more than the law. Judge Ellison targeted me because I embarrassed him. Now everyone can see the truth." Back inside chambers, Marcus sat alone at his desk, absorbing the humiliation without allowing his face to show any emotion. The walls seemed to close in around him as he processed what had just occurred. Dana burst through the door minutes later, her face flushed with anger and concern. "Marcus, this is temporary," she said breathlessly. "The panel is just being cautious. They have to investigate thoroughly." "I understand," Marcus replied quietly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But if another judge inherits this case for sentencing—" Dana's voice trailed off. The implications hung heavy between them. A new judge could reopen sentencing arguments. Victoria's attorneys would immediately challenge the 30-year exposure. Everything they had built could collapse. Marcus nodded slowly. "Justice doesn't depend on one judge, Dana. The evidence stands regardless of who sits behind this bench." Evelyn Brooks appeared in the doorway, carrying a manila folder. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus had worked with her long enough to recognize the tension in her shoulders. "The original archival backups remain completely untouched," she said firmly. "Independent time-stamped records from our security system. No one accessed them during the time frame in question." Marcus appreciated her loyalty, but he raised a hand to stop further discussion. "Let the investigators follow the evidence," he said. "I won't defend myself emotionally when the facts speak clearly." Hours passed slowly. Marcus reviewed other cases while trying to ignore the circus outside. Reporters had set up permanent stations on the courthouse steps. Victoria's supporters held signs demanding judicial accountability. Late that afternoon, Evelyn returned to chambers. Her face had changed completely. The tension was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like satisfaction. "They found the payment chain," she said quietly. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Marcus entered through the judicial chamber's door. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the walls with notebooks ready. Victoria sat at the defense table wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, her expression calm but watchful. Panel Chairman Robert Hayes stood at the podium holding a thick report that would determine Marcus's professional fate. After thorough investigation, Hayes began, his voice carrying across the packed room, "This panel finds no evidence that Judge Marcus Ellison manipulated the case assignment process." A collective exhale swept through the gallery. Victoria's smile flickered but didn't disappear. The archived backup systems, maintained independently by courthouse security protocols, contain no record of unauthorized access from Judge Ellison's chambers during the relevant time frame, Hayes continued. Furthermore, forensic analysis reveals that the suspicious access log was created 3 days after Ms. Ashbourne received her sentencing exposure warning. Victoria's face went rigid. Hale shifted uncomfortably beside her. The fabricated entry has been traced to administrative credentials belonging to Meridian Legal Services, a courthouse contractor. Financial records show Meridian received consulting payments from Legal Advisory Partners, a firm connected to the Ashbourne family office. Gasps rippled through the spectator section. Victoria's hands clenched into fists on the defense table. This panel concludes that someone deliberately attempted to undermine Judge Ellison's authority through falsified evidence, Hayes announced. Judge Ellison remains fully authorized to complete all proceedings in People v. Ashbourne. Marcus nodded once, accepting the vindication without visible emotion. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations as reporters scribbled frantically. Victoria leaned toward Hale, whispering something harsh. Her attorney pulled back, shaking his head firmly. Additionally, Hayes continued, the property trusts frozen, pending this investigation, remain under judicial restriction. Ms. Ashbourne's emergency recusal petition is denied as without merit. Victoria stood abruptly. This is— Sit down, Marcus said quietly. She remained standing for 3 long seconds, staring at him with undisguised hatred. Then she dropped into her chair with enough force to make the table shudder. Hayes concluded the announcement and left the courtroom. The crowd began filtering out, many reporters rushing to file immediate stories. Victoria's public campaign against Marcus had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. Dana gathered her files, feeling genuine relief for the first time in weeks. The investigation was over. Marcus kept the case. The frozen assets remained protected. Victoria's desperate gambit had collapsed completely. "We survived it," Dana said quietly to Gloria Bennett, who sat in the front row. "Everything she threw at us, we survived." Gloria nodded, tears in her eyes. That judge never lost his dignity. Not once. For several hours that afternoon, the mood in the prosecution office was almost celebratory. Phone calls poured in from colleagues congratulating Marcus on weathering the storm. Local news coverage focused on Victoria's failed attempt to corrupt courthouse records. Then Dana's phone rang. Senior financial analyst Janet Morrison sounded sick over the connection. "Dana, we have a serious problem with the Ashbourne banking exhibits." Dana's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem? Remember the batch of account records from Pacific Trust Bank? The ones showing the shell company transfers? Those records are crucial to our sentencing case," Dana said, already dreading Morrison's next words. "I just discovered they were imported using an unauthorized data processing method. The bank's compliance officer flagged the extraction process as potentially compromising to the record's authenticity." The words hit Dana like cold water. Those banking exhibits formed the backbone of her financial case against Victoria. They showed the deliberate pattern of transfers that elevated the charges to federal enhancement levels. "How compromised?" Dana asked. "Unknown, but defense counsel will absolutely challenge their admissibility now." 20 minutes later, Hale filed an emergency motion demanding complete exclusion of the Pacific Trust banking records from all sentencing calculations. Your Honor, Hale argued in the hastily arranged hearing, these exhibits were obtained through improper data mining techniques that cast serious doubt on their reliability. The prosecution cannot build a sentencing case on potentially contaminated evidence. Victoria sat beside him, her confidence returning like floodwater. The smile was back. The predatory gleam in her eyes had returned. Dana fought back desperately. These records have been authenticated by a flawed process, Hale interrupted. The defense moves to exclude all Pacific Trust exhibits and any sentencing enhancements dependent upon them. Marcus studied the motion carefully. Without those banking records, the provable victim loss amount would fall significantly. The 30-year exposure required specific financial thresholds that Dana might no longer be able to establish. Victoria leaned forward slightly, catching Marcus's attention. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but he heard every word. "Do you still enjoy saying 30 years, Your Honor?" Marcus looked at her directly. Her mocking tone reminded him of that first day when she raised her middle finger at his bench, but now she thought she had found salvation in compromised evidence. "Ms. Ashbourne," Marcus said evenly, "justice cannot survive by using questionable evidence simply because a defendant deserves punishment. If these records are unreliable, they will be excluded." Victoria's smile widened. She had spent weeks trying to destroy Marcus's credibility and failed completely. But now the evidence itself might save her from the sentence that had terrified her since the moment he first said those words. Marcus turned to Dana. "I'm ordering a complete evidentiary review of all Pacific Trust banking exhibits. We will determine exactly what evidence can properly support any sentence in this case." Dana felt her carefully built case beginning to crumble. The financial records she had spent 2 years assembling might disappear entirely. Without them, she would have to rebuild the prosecution's sentencing argument from scratch. The courthouse emptied quickly after Marcus ordered the evidentiary review. Dana waited until the last reporter left before approaching the bench. "Your Honor, may I request a brief chambers conference, off the record?" Marcus nodded toward Evelyn Brooks, who had been quietly organizing court files during the hearing. "Ms. Brooks, please join us." In chambers, Dana sat across from Marcus's desk, while Evelyn pulled up the case documentation on her tablet. The weight of the afternoon's disaster pressed down on all three of them. "I need to understand exactly what evidence remains untouched by the Pacific Trust contamination," Dana said. "You cannot help me prosecute, but the record has to be clear about what you'll consider." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "The court will only rely on properly authenticated evidence, nothing questionable, nothing that creates doubt about the process." "The banking records formed the core of my financial case," Dana said. "Without them, I lose most of the victim loss calculations that support the federal enhancements." Evelyn looked up from her tablet. "What about the non-banking exhibits? The property documents? Witness statements? Corporate filings?" Dana pulled out her legal pad and began writing. "Let me think through what we established independently." She drew lines connecting different pieces of evidence. Walter Reed's original property document with the notarized signature. The forged refinancing agreement that copied his signature exactly. The forensic analysis proving the duplication. "Walter's case stands alone," Dana said. "The signature forgery was proven through document comparison, not banking records." Marcus nodded. That evidence came from handwriting analysis and notary verification, completely separate process. "Gloria Bennett's settlement offer," Dana continued writing. "Victoria's people approached her directly. We have the written offer, the trust documentation, the payment structure." "That's witness tampering evidence," Evelyn noted, "based on Gloria's testimony and the offer documents themselves." Dana felt her confidence returning slightly. The frozen property transfers Victoria authorized right before trial. Those came from her own corporate filings, not the disputed bank records. Court-ordered asset preservation, Marcus said. Based on transfer documents Victoria's attorneys filed themselves. The courthouse archive logs, Dana added to her list. Evelyn's backup system that proved someone fabricated Marcus's access records. Evelyn smiled grimly. Those archives exist completely outside the banking evidence. They're our own internal systems. And the contractor payment trail, Dana finished. The technology consultant who created the false logs received payments from Victoria's legal services company. That came from corporate accounting, not Pacific Trust. Marcus studied Dana's notes. You're rebuilding the case from evidence Victoria cannot claim is contaminated. Each piece exists independently, Dana said. Walter's forged signature proves intentional fraud. Gloria's settlement offer shows continued victim manipulation. The frozen transfers demonstrate asset concealment. The archive logs prove someone tried to manufacture evidence against you. The contractor payments connect that fabrication directly to Victoria's network. Evelyn checked her tablet again. The timeline works perfectly. All of these events happened after Victoria received her 30-year warning. She created evidence against herself while trying to destroy Marcus. Dana stood, energized for the first time since Morrison's devastating phone call. I can rebuild this entire case without touching a single Pacific Trust record. The court will review whatever you present, Marcus said carefully, but it must be solid, no shortcuts, no assumptions. I understand. Dana gathered her notes. Justice cannot survive by using questionable evidence, but it also cannot fail because a defendant tries to contaminate the process. 20 minutes later, Dana sat in her office reviewing case files while her assistant brought coffee. The contaminated banking records had terrified her because they seemed essential. Now she realized Victoria's desperate attempts to escape accountability had created a different kind of evidence trail. Every action Victoria took after Marcus said 30 years had been documented. The edited video clips, the fabricated courthouse logs, the pressure on witnesses, the asset transfers, the contractor payments. Victoria had spent weeks trying to prove Marcus was corrupt. Instead, the record showed someone attempting to corrupt the system around him. Dana's phone buzzed with a text from Morrison. Defense filing suggests they want the entire financial case thrown out, not just Pacific Trust. Dana smiled for the first time that day. Let them try. The independent evidence did not depend on banking records at all. Across town, Victoria paced in Gregory Hale's office while he reviewed the court transcripts from the afternoon hearing. The contaminated records saved us, Victoria said. Without their banking evidence, they cannot prove the federal enhancement levels. Hale looked up from the transcript. The excluded records will not erase your convictions, Victoria, and they certainly will not erase the conduct you committed afterward. What do you mean? I mean attempting to influence witnesses, concealing assets, and fabricating courthouse records. Those actions happened independently of any banking evidence. Victoria's confidence wavered. But without the financial calculations, the court can still sentence you based on the underlying fraud convictions and your post-conviction conduct. Hale set down the transcript. You made this case worse by fighting it. Then attack Marcus again, Victoria demanded. Question his integrity, his bias, his no. The word stopped Victoria mid-sentence. Hale stood behind his desk. I will defend you aggressively within ethical boundaries, but I will not present accusations already disproven by evidence. You work for me, Victoria snapped. I work for you as a lawyer, not as an accomplice. The courthouse archives proved Marcus did not manipulate your case assignment. The complete video recording proved he did not threaten you out of anger. I will not repeat claims the evidence contradicts. Victoria stared at him, You are abandoning me when I need you most. I am practicing law instead of participating in a public relations campaign." Hale sat back down. "The fabricated access logs nearly destroyed my professional reputation by association. I will defend your case, but I will not attack the court with disproven allegations." Their partnership, built on aggressive legal tactics and Victoria's unlimited budget, fractured completely in that moment. Victoria left Hale's office knowing she could no longer control her own attorney. The man who had been willing to stretch courtroom procedure aggressively was now drawing lines she could not cross. At midnight, Dana finished typing her new sentencing memorandum, 37 pages built entirely from evidence Victoria could not dismiss as contaminated. Walter Reed's forged signature proved intentional falsification targeting vulnerable homeowners. Gloria Bennett's settlement offer demonstrated continued attempts to silence victims during active proceedings. The frozen property transfers showed Victoria deliberately concealing criminal proceeds from potential restitution. The courthouse archive logs proved that fabricated evidence appeared after Victoria targeted Marcus personally. The contractor payment trail connected that fabrication directly to Victoria's financial network. Each piece of evidence existed independently of the disputed Pacific Trust banking records. Together, they painted a clear picture of calculated fraud, followed by escalating attempts to corrupt the legal process itself. Dana saved the document and sent it to the court clerk's office for morning filing. The contaminated banking records had seemed like a catastrophic loss. Instead, they forced her to build a stronger case from evidence Victoria had helped create through her own desperate actions. The woman who thought money could buy her way out of accountability had spent weeks generating new evidence of her willingness to corrupt whatever system stood between her and freedom. The courtroom filled early that Thursday morning. Reporters claimed the front rows while Gloria Bennett and Walter Reed sat behind the prosecution table, both carrying small notebooks they had prepared for weeks. Evelyn Brooks positioned herself near the clerk's station, watching the proceedings with the careful attention she brought to every major hearing. Victoria entered wearing a navy suit that cost more than most people earned in months. She sat beside Gregory Hale at the defense table, her posture straight and confident despite everything that had happened. Marcus took the bench at exactly 9 o'clock. "We are here for final sentencing in the matter of People versus Victoria Ashbourne. Mr. Hale, I understand you have preliminary motions." Hale stood smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense moves to exclude Exhibits 17 through 34 based on the contamination issues identified in our filing." Dana did not object. She had already decided to abandon the disputed banking records entirely. "The prosecution does not oppose excluding the exhibits in question," she said simply. Victoria's eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed into satisfaction. She leaned toward Hale. "They are giving up their strongest evidence." Marcus reviewed the exhibit list. "Very well. Exhibits 17 through 34 are excluded from sentencing consideration." Victoria smiled for the first time in days. Without those banking records, the prosecution's financial calculations would collapse. The 30-year exposure Marcus had threatened suddenly seemed impossible to support. "Ms. Mercer," Marcus continued, "you may present your sentencing evidence." Dana rose calmly. "The people will proceed with independent evidence establishing the defendant's culpability and the aggravating factors that support an enhanced sentence." She walked to the evidence table. "Your Honor, I present People's Exhibit A1, the original notarized property deed preserved by Mr. Walter Reed, along with the forensic comparison showing that his signature was lifted from this legitimate document and placed onto fraudulent transfer agreements." The signature expert took the witness stand and explained how microscopic imperfections in Walter's genuine signature matched perfectly with the questioned documents. Someone photographed or scanned Mr. Reed's authentic signature and digitally placed it onto contracts he never signed. Victoria's smile began to fade. She whispered urgently to Hale, Object to the technical analysis. Hale remained seated. The forensic evidence was solid, and challenging it would accomplish nothing except delaying the inevitable. People's Exhibit A2, Dana continued, presenting the settlement documents. Ms. Ashbourne's attempt to silence victim Gloria Bennett through a financial offer exceeding the value of her stolen property, contingent upon withdrawing her victim impact statement. Victoria hissed under her breath. Challenge the admissibility. On what grounds? Hale asked quietly. Find grounds, Victoria demanded. Hale did not move. The settlement offer had been properly disclosed and authenticated. Objecting without legal foundation would damage his credibility with the court. Dana methodically presented each piece of independent evidence. The property trust documents, showing Victoria's attempt to shield criminal proceeds from restitution. The archived courthouse logs, proving that fabricated access records appeared 3 days after Marcus announced the 30-year exposure. The contractor payment trail, connecting that fabrication directly to Victoria's family office. With each exhibit, Victoria's composure cracked further. She repeatedly whispered demands for objections, but Hale refused to challenge evidence he could not legally contest. Your Honor, Dana concluded, these exhibits establish a pattern of calculated fraud, followed by escalating attempts to corrupt the judicial process itself. Marcus reviewed the evidence methodically. Ms. Bennett, you may present your victim impact statement. Gloria stood slowly. Her voice carried quiet dignity as she described the home where she had raised 3 children, nursed her husband through his final illness, and built 40 years of memories. I am not asking for revenge, she said simply. I am asking that no other family face what we faced. Victoria suddenly shot to her feet. This entire proceeding is a staged humiliation designed to make me a symbol. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters leaned forward, pens moving rapidly across notebooks. Ms. Ashbourne, Marcus said firmly, you will sit down immediately. You have already decided my sentence based on your personal feelings, Victoria continued, her voice rising. This court cannot provide justice when the judge treats defendants as political statements. Sit down now, Marcus ordered, his voice carrying absolute authority. 2 bailiffs moved closer to the defense table. Victoria glanced at them, then slowly returned to her chair, her face flushed with anger. Marcus waited until complete silence returned to the courtroom. Ms. Ashbourne, you will receive one final opportunity to speak before sentence is imposed. Victoria remained on her feet, her hands gripping the edge of the defense table. The silence stretched across the courtroom like a held breath, but she refused to sit down. You want to know what I think? Victoria's voice cut through the quiet. I think you needed me, Judge Ellison. You needed someone like me to walk into your courtroom so you could prove you belong in that robe. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters' pens moved frantically. Hale closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. Victoria stepped away from the table, her voice gaining strength. This entire case became personal the moment I challenged your authority. You cannot separate your ego from your judgment, because people like you spend every day proving you deserve the power you were given. Marcus sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the bench. His expression remained calm, professional, unchanged. You want to punish me for 30 years, not because of fraud, but because I showed this courtroom that your authority only exists when people choose to respect it. Victoria's voice rose higher. I refuse to pretend your position makes you untouchable. That is my real crime. The courtroom held its collective breath. Every eye moved between Victoria and Marcus, waiting for his response. Victoria pointed directly at the bench. You needed a wealthy white defendant to humiliate so you could feel powerful. This sentence is not about justice. It is about revenge. Marcus waited several seconds after Victoria finished speaking. The silence became complete. Ms. Ashbourne, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying absolute control. "You are correct that this case became personal, but not in the way you believe." He leaned slightly forward, his eyes meeting hers directly. "Your insult to this court is not the basis of your sentence," Marcus continued with precise clarity. "Your gesture of contempt is not the basis of your sentence. Your public attacks against my integrity are not the basis of your sentence. Your attempts to question my qualifications are not the basis of your sentence." Victoria's confident expression began to waver. "The basis of your sentence," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, "is calculated fraud committed against 17 separate victims over a period of 4 years. He lifted the first document from his desk. "The basis of your sentence is the systematic targeting of elderly homeowners who trusted institutions they believed were regulated and lawful." Another document. "The basis of your sentence is the creation and use of forged transfer agreements designed to steal property from families who had legal title to their homes." Victoria's face began to pale. "The basis of your sentence," Marcus continued methodically, "is the establishment of fraudulent trust arrangements intended to shield criminal proceeds from restitution even after conviction." His voice carried the weight of absolute judicial authority. "The basis of your sentence is the documented attempt to pressure witnesses through financial offers contingent upon withdrawing their victim statements." Victoria gripped the table again, her knuckles white. "The basis of your sentence is conduct demonstrating continuing contempt for legal orders and systematic efforts to corrupt judicial proceedings through fabricated evidence." Marcus set down the final document. "These actions show a defendant who believes legal consequences apply to other people." The courtroom remained frozen in complete silence. Marcus reached for his sentencing order. "I want to be absolutely clear for any reviewing court that the excluded financial exhibits played no role in this determination. The sentence is based entirely upon the evidence properly before this court." Victoria's breathing became shallow and quick. "Ms. Ashbourne," Marcus said, looking directly at her across the courtroom, "you spent considerable time and resources attempting to make this proceeding about my character, my background, and my qualifications." He lifted the signed sentencing order. "But this proceeding was always about your crimes and your choices." Marcus's voice filled the courtroom with quiet finality. "Based upon the jury's findings and the evidence presented, this court sentences you to 30 years in state prison." The words landed like a physical blow. Victoria's confident posture collapsed, her face drained of all color. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "given the defendant's demonstrated attempts to hide assets and manipulate these proceedings, the court orders immediate remand into custody pending appeal." 2 deputies moved silently behind Victoria's chair. Their presence was professional but unmistakable. Victoria turned slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief, as the bailiff stepped closer to escort her from the courtroom where she had once believed she could mock a judge without consequences. The deputies moved with practiced efficiency behind Victoria's chair. The taller officer positioned himself at her left shoulder, while his partner stood ready with restraints. "Your Honor," Hale said quickly, stepping forward, "we request that Ms. Ashbourne remain free pending appeal. She has substantial community ties and—" "Motion denied," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the courtroom's tension. "The defendant has demonstrated repeated attempts to interfere with these proceedings through witness pressure, asset concealment, and fabricated evidence." Victoria's head snapped up. "This is insane. I have rights." "You do," Marcus replied evenly, "and those rights include the right to appeal. But your conduct during these proceedings establishes a serious risk of continued obstruction if you remain free." The deputy at Victoria's left touched her elbow gently. "Ma'am, please stand." Victoria jerked away from his hand. Don't touch me. This entire proceeding is a fraud. Hale moved closer to his client. Victoria, please remain calm. We'll address these issues through proper appellate channels. Proper channels? Victoria's voice rose sharply. There's nothing proper about any of this. She twisted in her chair, her eyes blazing as she stared across the courtroom at Gloria and Walter sitting in the front row. This is your fault. Victoria pointed directly at them, her composure completely shattered. You people destroyed my life because you were too stupid to understand basic business transactions. Gloria sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Walter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. You turned a simple property matter into this circus because you couldn't accept that you lost. Victoria's voice cracked with desperation. I offered you money. I offered you more than your worthless houses were ever worth. The deputy stepped forward again, his hand moving toward Victoria's shoulder. Ma'am, you need to stand now. Victoria continued screaming at the victims. You destroyed everything because you were too proud to take what I gave you. This is what your precious dignity cost. That's enough, the deputy said firmly. His hand closed on Victoria's upper arm, turning her away from the gallery and toward the custody exit. Face forward, please. Victoria struggled briefly against his grip, but the officer's training made resistance pointless. She found herself facing the side door that led to the holding area. Marcus lifted his pen and signed the sentencing order with deliberate strokes. Then he reached for the restitution documentation that Dana had prepared weeks earlier. The court further orders, Marcus announced clearly, that restitution proceedings may commence immediately against the defendant's frozen trust assets. Evelyn Brooks moved forward from her position near the clerk's station. She accepted the signed documents from Marcus and began entering the orders into the official court file, the same file system that Victoria had tried to corrupt through fabricated access logs. Gloria felt Walter's hand touch her arm gently. She looked at him with questioning eyes. Ms. Bennett, Dana said softly, leaning over the rail that separated the prosecution table from the gallery. Your property is listed first among the assets eligible for restoration. Gloria's eyes widened. The home where she had raised her children, where she had worked in her garden every spring, where she had built 40 years of memories. That home might actually be returned to her. Walter gripped his original deed more tightly. The document that had proven Victoria's people forged his signature would now become the foundation for reclaiming the house his father built with his own hands. Marcus signed the final restitution order and handed it to Evelyn. She stamped it with the official court seal and added it to the growing file of Victoria's defeat. The deputy at Victoria's shoulder guided her toward the custody door. At the threshold, she turned back one last time, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. Her eyes found Marcus across the courtroom, the judge she had mocked with her middle finger, the man she had publicly called unqualified, the person whose authority she had dismissed as meaningless theater. Marcus looked back at her with the same calm professionalism he had maintained throughout her attacks. No anger, no satisfaction, no words of triumph or condemnation. He simply watched as the woman who believed wealth could intimidate an entire justice system faced the consequences of her choices. The custody door closed with a solid metallic click. Victoria Ashbourne disappeared behind it, beginning her 30-year sentence while Marcus signed the first order, returning stolen property to her victims.